every one of these feats, the rocket that lands with unerring precision, the surgeon's hand guided by invisible axes, the 3D face emerging pixel by pixel on a screen, the map that can place you anywhere on Earth, all share a single invisible foundation, a code, a map, a grid. But this grid was not born in a Silicon Valley garage, nor in a lab humming with modern machines. It was born in the mind of a solitary man, a 17th century soldier, lying on a narrow cot in a cold German stove room, feverish with dreams that blurred the line between reality and imagination. Dreams of wind and fire, thunder and light, words and images converging into a single audacious vision. In that moment, he glimpsed the possibility of a universe that could be measured, mapped, and understood. A universe where points and lines could speak, where numbers could describe the invisible rhythms of nature, and where the mind itself could chart the unknown. This man was René Descartes, and what he imagined would become the language through which we navigate our world, a geometry of thought that would echo through centuries, shaping the machines, the maps, and even the very way we see ourselves. In the late 16th century, the world was a place alive with mystery. Scholars spoke of the heavens as a living organism, each star and planet entwined in a cosmic symphony, governed not by mathematics, but by qualities, spirits, and divine intention. Knowledge was not measured in numbers, but in observation, allegory, and careful interpretation. The universe itself seemed to whisper secrets to those who would listen closely enough. Alchemists toiled in dimly lit laboratories, chasing the transformation of matter, the philosopher's stone, the secret elixir of life. Their hands stained with ink and soot, their eyes wide with wonder at the small glowing phenomena in flasks and crucibles. Every experiment was a dialogue with the hidden forces of the world, an attempt to read the invisible code of nature before numbers had a voice. Astrologers traced the paths of planets, mapping the heavens with painstaking care. Charts and symbols filled parchment after parchment, each curve, line, and sign a key to human destiny, the fates of kings, and the rhythm of the seasons. They sought meaning in patterns the world had yet to quantify. And yet, amidst this intricate tapestry of knowledge, there was a restless undercurrent, a sense that something fundamental had been missed. A map of the universe existed, but no one knew its language. It was a world teeming with beauty and complexity, but one whose truths remained tantalizingly out of reach, waiting for a mind bold enough to imagine a way to measure, to describe, to understand. This was the world René Descartes was born into, a universe of secrets, where every mystery was a challenge and every answer an invitation to discover something that could change the way humans see the cosmos forever. René Descartes' mind was never content to sit still. Even as a boy at La Flèche Jesuit College, surrounded by the rigid structures of classical learning, he felt a quiet rebellion stirring within him. The texts were rich, the teachings revered, but the answers felt predetermined, like doors locked before the question was even asked. Geometry and philosophy were treated as sacred, untouchable. Imagination and doubt were unwelcome guests. He yearned for more than rote memorization and the weight of centuries-old tradition. His thoughts were restless, pressing against the confines of the classroom, questioning the assumptions of his teachers, of the world itself. The world was vast, and he longed to wander it, to see it with his own eyes, to understand it through his own reasoning. As a young man, he became a soldier, traveling across the stormy plains and misty forests of Europe. The discipline of military life, the harsh cold, the endless marches, these were as much a crucible for thought as the classrooms he had left behind. Alone by campfires at dusk, he would write in secret, sketching ideas and dreams onto parchment, letting questions simmer in the silence between the crackle of flames and the whisper of the wind. It was in these moments of solitude and movement that Descartes' mind began to stir with audacious ideas. He envisioned a universe not as a collection of mysterious qualities to be interpreted, but as a mechanism, a grand machine whose rules could be discovered, described, and understood. The restless boy of La Flèche, the soldier marching through fog and rain, was becoming the man who would one day map the invisible, laying the foundation for a geometry of thought that could bridge imagination and certainty. The winter was bitterly cold in Germany that year. Snow pressed against the window panes, and the small stove-heated room glowed like a lonely ember in the darkness. René Descartes lay wrapped in blankets, his body weakened by fever, his mind burning with questions that refused to rest. The world outside slept, but his thoughts did not. Somewhere between waking and sleeping, between reason and delirium, the barrier gave way, and the dreams began. In the first dream, the wind came without warning. It roared down empty streets and howled through alleyways, seizing him like an invisible hand. He felt himself pushed, pulled, spun by forces he could neither see nor command. The world tilted around him, as if the very ground doubted its place. He stumbled forward, heart pounding, realizing that what he had been taught to trust could not hold him steady. He was a man in a storm made of uncertainty itself. Then the sky tore open. Thunder cracked across the heavens like the sound of a universe being struck. A blinding light flooded everything, too fierce to be candle or sun. In that brilliance, the familiar world dissolved. Books lifted into the air, objects broke free from their places. The laws of nature themselves seemed to tremble. It was terrifying, yet strangely inviting, as though the storm was not there to destroy, but to reveal. In the final dream, the storm fell silent. He found himself before a long wooden table set in an endless darkness. Upon it lay two books. One was a massive dictionary, weighty and solemn, the Book of Language. The other, a slender volume of poetry, alive with rhythm and imagination. They opened of their own accord. Words lifted from the pages, letters, phrases, verses, rising like sparks from a fire. And among them, numbers began to appear. Lines and shapes emerged, weaving themselves together with language, as if the universe were whispering that meaning and mathematics were not enemies, but partners. In that moment, the realization came to him like a sunrise after storm. All knowledge did not have to be scattered into separate disciplines. It could be united, ordered, mapped. There could be a method strong enough to move through doubt, strong enough to separate truth from illusion. There could be a way to bind the poetry of human thought to the precision of number. A universal science, a geometry not only of space, but of thought itself. He awoke with a gasp in the dim glow of the stove room. No wind, no thunder, no floating books, only the pounding of his heart and a certainty that could not be dismissed. Fever had carried him far, but reason now began to walk. He reached for parchment. He began to write. The dreams had spoken, and the rest of his life would be an attempt to answer them. From this night of fire and vision, a new project was born, a project that would question everything, a project that would redraw the map of knowledge. The world would one day know it by another name, but for Descartes, in that quiet room, it began simply as this, an overwhelming conviction that the universe could be understood if only one could find the right method to think. Illness has a way of stopping a man in his tracks. For most people, it is an interruption, an unwelcome pause in the rhythm of life. For René Descartes, it became something else. It became a room, a still, narrow room where the body weakened and the mind was forced to listen to itself. The winter had crept into his bones, his strength faded, days blurred into nights. The world outside continued in its restless motion, armies marching, markets trading, scholars disputing. But within these walls, everything slowed to a near silent halt. The clock did not tick faster because he was brilliant. The fever did not spare him because he was ambitious. The body reminded him that even the sharpest mind must bow to frailty. And yet, in the quiet, something unexpected happened. When motion was taken from him, thought deepened. When conversation was stripped away, reflection grew louder. He could not travel, so he journeyed inward. He could not debate, so he began to question himself. And the questions that rose within him were not small. What can I truly know? What, if everything else collapses, remains certain? And is the world really as chaotic as it appears, or is there a hidden order beneath it? He watched the play of shadows on the wall. He noticed the straight lines of the beams above him. He traced with tired eyes the crystalline patterns frost carved upon the window pane. Geometry was not yet a system to be written. It was simply there, woven into the wood, the glass, the stars, the breath of winter itself. The sickness weakened his limbs, but it sharpened the blade of his attention. And in those long hours between sleep and waking, between pain and peace, a realization began to form, not in thunder and fireworks, but in whisper and light. The world was not simply a place of accidents and confusion. It was shaped, structured, held together by laws, by relationships, by lines and curves that could be understood. He did not yet have the language for what would come. He did not yet know that one day people would speak of Cartesian geometry, Cartesian coordinates, Cartesian doubt. For now, he only knew this. If one could doubt everything, then one must search for what cannot be doubted. If one could mistrust the senses, then truth must lie deeper than sight or sound. And if God had created the world, then surely it was not chaos, but intelligible, ordered, profoundly rational. His body slowly healed, the fever passed, but Descartes did not leave that sick room unchanged. He would carry out of it a resolution, a fierce, quiet vow, to rebuild knowledge from the ground up, to question everything that could be questioned, to search for certainty not in authority, not in tradition, not in reputation, but in the clear light of reason itself. This is where the journey truly begins, not in Paris, not in Leiden, not in the courts of Europe, but in a small room in the silence of illness, where a solitary man learned to listen to his own mind and discovered that thought itself could become a geometry. The world had always spoken in sensations, the warmth of sunlight, the weight of a stone in the hand, the rhythm of a heartbeat. For millennia, human beings described nature the way poets describe love, through metaphor, through story, through awe. Descartes dared to do something different. He looked at the same world, the falling apple, the turning wheel, the flowing river, and asked a new question. What if nature is not telling us a story? What if it is solving an equation? In his small rooms in the Netherlands, far from courts and battlefields, he began a quiet revolution. Paper, ink, silence. The tools of a man preparing to redraw reality itself. He imagined the universe as a vast machine, not cold, not cruel, simply lawful. Every motion, every curve, every collision following rules written not in Latin prose, but in numbers. And he believed the human mind, guided by a clear method, could read those rules. Strip away tradition, strip away authority, strip away what everyone knows. Start again. Ask only what can be known with certainty. From that certainty, build upward, step by step, until the fog lifts and the machinery of nature stands exposed. To many, this view was shocking. Mountains were no longer sacred giants, just matter in motion. The human body was no longer a mystery, but a marvelous device of bones and levers. The heavens were no longer divine perfection, just objects following paths that could, in principle, be measured. For Descartes, this was not desecration, it was liberation. Because if the world could be measured, it could be understood, and if it could be understood, it could be transformed. The key was the map he had not yet fully revealed, the bridge between thought and extension, between mind and matter, a way for numbers to draw shapes, and for shapes to speak in numbers. He was on the edge of it now. The instrument was almost ready, the method was in place, the question hung in the air like breath on a winter morning. How can the thinking mind grasp the sprawling complexity of the material world? Descartes' answer would not be a poem or a prayer or a philosophical dialogue. It would be a grid, and once it appeared, nothing in mathematics or in human history would ever look the same again. It began with something deceptively simple. A blank page. No ornament. No diagram handed down by ancient authority. Just space, waiting to be organized. Descartes drew 2 lines, one horizontal, one vertical. They met, quietly, at a single point. Nothing seemed extraordinary. 2 lines crossing. Children draw them every day. But in that intersection, a revolution was beginning. Descartes asked a question so small it almost went unnoticed. What if every point in space could be named with numbers? Not by poetry, not by metaphor, but by a pair of values. How far left or right, how far up or down. He realized that a point was not just somewhere. It could be X, Y. Position became number. Number became position. And slowly, like stars appearing in a night sky, points began to populate the page, each one obedient to its coordinates, each one exactly where the numbers said it must be. Then he went further. What if, instead of naming a single point, you named all the points that satisfied an equation? What if a simple algebraic statement could draw? He wrote one down, not a picture, a sentence in symbols, and the page responded. Points began to form a curve, first scattered, then connected, then whole, until a perfect circle emerged from nothing but numbers. Algebra had spoken. Geometry had answered. 2 worlds, once separate for 2,000 years, were suddenly in conversation. No longer would geometry rely on pictures alone. No longer would algebra float in a sea of symbols without shape. On this new grid, curves could be calculated, motion could be predicted, space itself could be measured and mastered. Every graph you have ever seen, every map, every design, every data plot, every digital image traces its lineage back to this quiet insight. The world had been given coordinates. The page was no longer blank. Reality itself could now be written. And as the lines strengthened and the grid expanded across the imagined plane, Descartes could not yet know he had just handed humanity a new sense organ, a way of seeing structure beneath appearance, a way of revealing order hidden in motion, a way of turning thought into geometry. The graph had been born, and the modern world was already starting to take shape upon it. It began with something deceptively simple, a blank page, no ornament, no diagram handed down by ancient authority, just space, waiting to be organized. Descartes drew two lines, one horizontal, one vertical. They met, quietly, at a single point. Nothing seemed extraordinary. Two lines, crossing. Children draw them every day. But in that intersection, a revolution was beginning. Descartes asked a question so small it almost went unnoticed. What if every point in space could be named with numbers? Not by poetry, not by metaphor, but by a pair of values. How far left or right, how far up or down. He realized that a point was not just somewhere, it could be X, Y. Position became number, number became position, and slowly, like stars appearing in a night sky, points began to populate the page, each one obedient to its coordinates, each one exactly where the numbers said it must be. Then he went further. What if, instead of naming a single point, you named all the points that satisfied an equation? What if a simple algebraic statement could draw? He wrote one down, not a picture, a sentence in symbols, and the page responded. Points began to form a curve, first scattered, then connected, then whole, until a perfect circle emerged from nothing but numbers. Algebra had spoken, geometry had answered. Two worlds once separate for 2,000 years were suddenly in conversation. No longer would geometry rely on pictures alone. No longer would algebra float in a sea of symbols without shape. On this new grid, curves could be calculated, motion could be predicted. The grid spread across paper, across thought, across the very way humanity imagined reality. Once space could be mapped with numbers, a new vision of the universe emerged, precise, ordered, astonishingly elegant. The cosmos was no longer a tapestry of mysteries and intentions. It was a machine, not a crude machine of wood and gears, but a vast, seamless mechanism governed by mathematical law. Planets no longer wandered like divine messengers. Their paths could be written as equations. Their futures could be predicted before they arrived. Motion itself, falling apples, swinging pendulums, tides and trajectories, could now be captured on the grid Descartes had drawn. Nature, once sacred and untouchable, was suddenly intelligible. Descartes believed that everything extended in space, stones, rivers, planets, bodies, followed the same simple principles of matter in motion. No hidden life force, no spirits pushing the stars, just laws, beautiful, relentless, exact. In this worldview, animals became automata, astonishing biological machines, the heart a pump, muscles, pulleys and levers, nerves, tiny strings transmitting signals through the body. Even the human body, this fragile frame of flesh and breath, was redrawn as mechanism. But the mind was something else. Here he drew a line sharper than any axis on his grid. Mind was not extension. Mind was not machine. Mind did not obey the same laws as matter. The thinking self, res cogitans, stood apart from the whirring universe of res extensa. Two realms, one of perfect measurable motion, one of thought, doubt, longing, fear, love, the things that refuse to be graphed. This division would haunt philosophy for centuries, but in its wake came power. With mathematics as language and coordinates as map, physicists began charting the heavens, engineers built with unprecedented confidence, navigators crossed oceans guided by numerical certainty. Descartes' dream of a knowable, ordered nature was taking hold. Even where he was wrong, even where his vortex theory of planets failed, the method remained, stronger than any single idea. If the world is lawful, the laws can be written. If they can be written, they can be discovered. If they can be discovered, they can be used. The clockwork universe was set in motion, ticking, turning, obeying rules indifferent to human hope or fear. And through the quiet scratching of pens on paper, through diagrams, equations, and grids extended without end, humanity stepped into a new age, one in which certainty seemed at last within reach, and the cost of seeing the world as a machine had only begun to reveal itself. By the late 1640s, René Descartes had become something he never sought to be: famous. His books traveled farther than he ever could. His ideas stirred arguments in universities, monasteries, salons, and secret letters passed between scholars who spoke his name in admiration or alarm. He wanted only what he had always wanted: quiet, a fire, a desk, time to think. Instead, a summons arrived from the north, from a young queen whose mind refused to be ornamental, Christina of Sweden. Brilliant, stubborn, insatiably curious. She devoured philosophy the way some rulers devoured territory, and she wanted Descartes, not just his books, but the man himself, to teach her. It was the one invitation he hesitated to accept. He was a creature of warmth and solitude. Sweden was neither. But the prospect was irresistible, a monarch hungry for ideas, a throne open to reason, a chance to shape a kingdom through thought rather than through war. So the philosopher-soldier once again became a traveler, northward, across frozen seas and iron-gray skies, into a winter harsher than any he had ever known. Stockholm in January was a city of breath turned instantly to frost. The palace was magnificent and cold to the bone. Fires sputtered against vast stone walls that swallowed their warmth whole. And Christina, overflowing with energy, insisted on lessons at dawn. While soldiers drilled in courtyards dusted with snow, Descartes wrapped himself in cloaks and made his way through echoing halls, lungs stung by freezing air, mind still sharp though the body protested. He taught by candlelight while the sun refused to rise. They discussed the soul, virtue, mathematics, the nature of certainty. He saw in her the same restless dissatisfaction he had once felt, a refusal to accept inherited answers simply because they were old. But the cold was relentless. The man who had once found his great inspiration in the warmth of a stove room now faced its opposite: chill seeping into bone, into breath, into life itself. Illness came quietly at first: a cough, a fever, fatigue that did not lift. Within weeks, the tutor who had crossed Europe by sword and by idea lay in a foreign bed, far from the silence and fireplaces he loved. On a February morning in 1650, in the white stillness of Scandinavian winter, René Descartes slipped away. Another body returned to the mechanistic world of matter in motion he had described. The man who sought warmth for thinking died in the cold. The man who longed for obscurity left a legacy impossible to ignore. His journey ended in frost. His ideas did not. They continued, across borders, across centuries, carried not by armies, but by students, scientists, skeptics, dreamers. And beneath them all, unseen yet indispensable, the grid he had drawn stretched further and further, quietly ordering a future he would never see. The centuries turned. Empires rose and fell. Wars scarred continents. New sciences were born, split and reborn again. Descartes did not live to see any of it, and yet he is everywhere. His grid lies invisibly beneath the world we inhabit, so deeply woven into daily life that we forget it is there at all. When an artist sculpts a face inside a computer, sliding points along invisible axes until emotion appears in pixels, when a surgeon guides a robotic arm through the labyrinth of the human body, trusting coordinates more than touch, when satellites whisper to phones and a blue dot appears, telling you exactly where you stand on the surface of the earth, you are standing inside Descartes' idea, a universe mapped, a world translated into numbers, reality expressed as data on a silent, endless grid. In labs and studios, in observatories and animation houses, the same miracle repeats. Equations become images, images become movement, movement becomes knowledge. A physicist models galaxies colliding, not with paint on canvas, but with points and vectors in an abstract space Descartes helped define. A neuroscientist charts the brain, billions of firing cells, transforming thought into patterns of light on a coordinate map. An engineer designs the wing of a jet or the curve of a bridge, trusting lines born from algebra to hold the weight of human lives. We live in the age where the machine has learned to speak back. Artificial intelligence, simulations, digital worlds, systems so vast and complex that even their creators sometimes strain to understand them, still rest upon the same foundation. A point, two numbers, a place on a grid. And yet a question lingers, unsettling, unresolved, unmistakably Cartesian. If the world of matter can be graphed so perfectly, what about the self that does the graphing? We can map the brain, we can model behavior, we can predict choices with frightening accuracy. But the quiet voice that says I, the inner life of hope, guilt, imagination, prayer, love, does it live inside the coordinates or forever beyond them? Descartes split the universe in two, mind and body, machine and soul, the measurable and the immeasurable. We have spent centuries trying to sew it back together. Some say consciousness is only computation, that even the ghost is just another machine waiting to be understood. Others insist there is something stubbornly unquantifiable in us, a flame no grid can capture. Between those two convictions, modern life unfolds. Our rockets land by mathematics, our stories are animated by equations, our cities pulse to rhythms calculated to the last decimal, and yet we still wake in the night asking the same ancient questions. Who am I? What is this mind that thinks? Am I only coordinates or something more? Descartes did not answer these questions. He gave us something else instead. A language powerful enough to let us ask them amid galaxies, networks, and machines we built with his tools. The ghost remains, the machine grows, and through it all, the faint lines of a 17th century grid stretch quietly beneath our feet, guiding planes, guiding numbers, guiding thought, as humanity continues to navigate the space between the mapped world and the immeasurable self. There are moments in history when an idea becomes so successful that it disappears. Descartes' grid is one of them. We no longer marvel at it, we expect it. Behind every map, every chart, every simulation, every screen, it is the invisible stage on which the modern world performs. In Paris, his tomb rests quietly beneath vaulted stone. Tourists pass, whisper, move on. They cannot see the lines extending silently from that place, across continents, across disciplines, across the very texture of everyday life. He had searched for certainty in an age of confusion. He had doubted everything that could be doubted, until only one thing remained: a thinking self, aware of its own awareness. From that fragile foundation, he built a method. From that method, he drew a grid. From that grid, we built a civilization. And yet, the cost remains with us. We gained mastery over matter, over motion, energy, distance, the architecture of the atom and the span of galaxies. But we also inherited the divide he drew, the measured world and the lived one, the machine we understand and the self we do not. Scientists map the brain in exquisite detail, its currents, its signals, its storm of quiet light, and still stand before the mystery of consciousness, that first-person flame that refuses to be reduced. Engineers coordinate cities and skies. Physicists coordinate the very fabric of space-time. Artists coordinate points of light into entire universes that glow on our screens. And each of us coordinates a life, choices, regrets, memories, hopes, trying to chart meaning in a world that can be measured to 12 decimal places but not explained by them. Descartes did not solve this tension. He named it. He gave us tools mighty enough to reshape the earth and questions deep enough to unsettle every age that followed. Tonight, satellites trace arcs overhead on paths defined long ago. Data glows and flows through unseen grids. Children learn to plot points as casually as they learn to write their names. Somewhere, a student stares at a blank axis, the same way Descartes once stared at an empty page, not yet knowing that the line they are about to draw is part of a story centuries long. The camera pulls back, from the tomb to the city, from the city to the continent, from the continent to the turning earth. A faint, translucent lattice spreads across the planet, not as a prison, but as a language, a way of speaking to the world and having it answer. A final thought remains soft but unyielding. We graph stars, but still wonder why we are moved by them. We map the brain, but still wrestle with the soul. We navigate through coordinates, but live through consciousness. René Descartes sought certainty and found a grid. We inherit both his triumph and his question. And as the lines fade into the darkness of space, only the quiet voice remains. I think. The rest of the world waits to be mapped.